So, welcome to today's session with the director of our summer school, Studies in Sufism, Paolo Urizzi. For those who don't know him, Paolo Urizzi is a specialist in Sufism and comparative metaphysics. He's also a lecturer in Sufism at the School for Advanced Studies in Oriental and Comparative Philosophy in Rimini, Italy. He is the president of the association Perennia Verba, that, as you know, is the main organizer of this summer school, this year organized in collaboration with MIAS UK and Latina and the Officina di Studi Medievali. He's also the editor of the book series in Comparative Religious Studies, Perennia Verba, and of the book series I Gioielli, a series that presents important works in Sufism, very often translated into European language for the first time. Both book series are published by the Italian publisher Il Leone Verde. Paolo Urizzi is also the founder of the group Les Cercles de Lumière, which via a collaboration with the French publisher al-Wâhid publishes French translation of the main works of the Tariqa Tijaniya. He has a very long list of articles, chapters, edited volumes, translations, and it's not possible to mention them all now, but I'm sure you can find more information simply by Googling his name or referring to his academia page. So his talk today is the Christic vision of the universal man in the writings of Shaykh al-Wâhid Yahyâ, René Guénon. Please, when you are ready.
So, I start with a Christian symbol. We will see why, and we're talking actually of a Christic spirituality within Islam, especially related to the notion of universal man as being expressed by Shaykh al-Wâhid Yahyâ. Actually, he just enlightened it, but it is, we will see that it's not just a thing which appears with René Guénon, but it was a main point, doctrinal point within the Islamic tradition from the ancient times. And we are going to explain what means Christic, of course, in that perspective. Okay, this we have a picture of René Guénon. Perhaps many people doesn't know it too much, especially in the English-speaking world, because he wrote in French and is well known in Italian too, and many other countries, but his language is really very Latin way of expression, and sometimes his thought is quite difficult to be conveyed in a Anglophone speaking, Anglophone word. Okay, René Guénon was born in France, at al-Wâhid, in November 1886, and died in Cairo in January 1951. This is what we are reading here in this first slide, is a description, very briefly, taken from Wikipedia, just to know how it is presented. But it depicts it quite properly. He was a French author, traditionalist and perennial philosopher, as we can say, who remained an influential figure in the domain of metaphysics, having written on topics ranging from sacred science to symbolism and initiation. But he has not written, but he was especially a critic to the modern mentality. He remains one of the most radical and consistent in terms of traditional thought. In his writing, he proposes either to expose directly some aspect of Eastern metaphysical doctrines, these doctrines being defined by himself as of universal character, or also to adopt this, his purpose was to adopt these same doctrines for Western readers while keeping strictly faithful to their spirit. He only endorses the act of handing down these Eastern doctrines while reiterating their non-human character. He wrote and published in French, and his work has been translated in more than 20 languages. It can also be said that its function was to restore the traditional spirit in the West, denouncing, on the one hand, the deviation of the modern mentality and its anti-traditional spirit, and on the other hand, trying to restore in the West the true intellectuality based on metaphysical knowledge of tradition, as it has been preserved in the East. In doing this, he chose to adopt mainly the language of Hindu metaphysics rather than those of Islam, because, as he himself said, the prejudice of the West toward Islam would have undermined the effectiveness of its function from the beginning. In fact, in his writings, the space dedicated to Sufism, at least at first sight, does not seem relevant. Of the approximately 538 chapters scattered in the 27 works of the official corpus, in fact, only 15 of these chapters bring titles which has a direct reference to Islamic exotericism. His adhesion of Guénon to Islam and his initiation into Sufism occurred at the time when he was editorial director of the magazine La Gnose. This happened, he was there from 1909 to 1912, where his first work under the pseudonym Palingenius also appeared. It is thanks to this magazine that he will come into contact with the Swedish painter and polyglot Ivan Ageli, alias al-Wâhid, who introduces the young Guénon to Islam and Sufism. It is through him that Guénon embraced Islam with the name of al-Wâhid Yahyâ. This occurred in the year 1910, as he himself specified in a letter to Tony Granger, who was Guénon's personal doctor. He wrote in it, I translate directly into English, not in French. Anyway, there is nothing new about me, far from it, since my attachment to Islamic initiatory organization dates back exactly to 1910, and he underlined the date. Ageli in Egypt has been the disciple of Sheikh Abdurrahman Elish al-Kabir, head of the Malikite school of Al-Azhar and Sheikh of the Tariqa al-Arabiya al-Shaziliya, of which Abdul Hadi Ageli had become a Muqaddam. Through him, Guénon was initiated into the Tariq of the Sheikh Elish, thus entering into the sphere of influence of Sheikh al-Akbar Muhyiddin ibn Arabi. In fact, from Ageli himself, we know that Elish al-Kabir was representative of that spiritual stream which crosses the Islamic world under the name al-Akbariya. The book of Guénon's Symbolism of the Cross bring this colophon. He said, dedicated to the venerable memory of Sheikh Elish Abdurrahman Elish al-Kabir, to whom the first idea for this book is due. We have a witness, because of Guénon was after those who embraced Islam among the Westerners especially, but even some people in the Islamic world criticized Guénon for being not so much Islamic. Apparently, of course, as he explained, he was not using the mainly the technical vocabulary of tasawwuf or Islamic expression. And so this make not very evident his deeply engagement in the Islamic tradition. But it is quite curious that Sheikh Abdel Halim Mahmoud, the late Sheikh of Al-Azhar, who met Guénon personally and was we can say, a kind of a friend of him when, in spite of he was much younger, he became, he was a Sheikh of the Tariqa Shadhiliyya, who wrote among many works that he was author, a book entitled Al-Madrasa Shadhiliyya. So it means the school of the Shadhili, of the Shadhili Sheikh. And he was just talking in this about 4 personalities which characterize this tariqa as eminent personality of this stream of spirituality in the Islamic world. And of course, as we can expect, the first one is the founder, Sheikh Abu al-Hasan al-Shadhili, and then his successor. What's the name of? Sorry, I have a number. But the fact is that in spite we can expect to have a third personality here, being the Ibn Talal Iskandari, who was the Sheikh, the third Sheikh of the Tariqat Shadhiliyya. We found the mention of Sheikh al-Wâhid Yahyâ, who Abdul Halim Mahmoud called Al-Arif Billah, Sheikh al-Wâhid Yahyâ. So, Guénon actually, by the year 1930, left Paris for a mission in Egypt in order to gather some books, but he never left Cairo. He settled there, he married there for the second time after his first wife died in France, and she was a daughter of an Egyptian sheikh, and spent his time in Egypt, in Cairo, writing books, articles, and engaging in a huge correspondence with intellectuals from all over the world. Even though he continued his interest in Hinduism and other religions, Guénon's own practice was purely Islamic. He is not known ever to have recommended anyone to become a Hindu, whereas he introduces many to Islam. Someone went even further. Looking at the way Guénon expressed himself, and he actually was the one who restored in the West the proper language which has to be used in order to a correct formulation of metaphysical and traditional doctrine, and with a special attention to the language and to the use of the singular expressions. And this was the main impact that he has on the Western intellectual mentality. So somebody said, has being a non-function foretold in the Quran? And he read this ayah of Surah Al-Shu'ara, the ayah 83 and 84, where Abraham said, "My Lord, grant me sacred authority and unite me with the righteous." And then he said in Arabic, "Wajal li lisanan sidkin fil akhirin," translating quite, we can say, in a way literally, but in a proper interpretation, he said, "And establish for me a language of truth among the people of the end of time." So this Guénonian said, we can expect this ayah referring to the function of Guénon. Okay. So what is his importance for the doctrine of Insan al-Kamil. In spite that we will see tomorrow from Alberto Grigio, who will talk about Abdel Karim al-Jili. Abdel Karim al-Jili himself said that before him, he was from the Baria school, he said before him and after him, nobody went so deeply and so in a detailed way into the doctrine of Insan al-Kamil. Actually, he devoted a book called Insan al-Kamil, but the majority of his books actually turn around the figure of the Prophet Muhammad, and the Prophet Muhammad is understood as being the Insan al-Kamil by excellence in Islam. What about Shaykh al-Akbar, who came before? Dawood Grill said that all the language of Shaykh al-Akbar and many of his doctrine found some germs or formulation in those who came before him. And that perhaps the peculiar way which is typical of Ibn Arabi is exactly the use of the term Insan al-Kamil. And Ibn Arabi is using this throughout all his work. And we can say that all his work is talking about the Insan al-Kamil. I would say that even the work of René Guénon is mainly talking only of Insan al-Kamil. In spite, beside, of course, the critics to the modern world or to some deviated doctrines that he criticized, or other specific item, but the majority of the main bulk of works of René Guénon is really dealing with Insan al-Kamil, especially the book Symbolism of the Cross. So when he started to talk about an Insan al-Kamil, very early, after he has been initiated by Ibn Agheli, al-Hadi Agheli, he received from him the translation, probably, of some short treatise which he published in Lagnos. One of those was Risala At-Tuhfa al-Mursala ila al-Nabi of Muhammad al-Burhanpuri. And from here, probably there is the main idea of the two essential terms relating to the symbolism of the cross, as we are going to see here now. Only 1 month had passed since Guénon had become al-Wâhid Yahyâ, that he published his first text with elements of the Islamic tradition. The text, prayer and incantation, draw attention to the nature of initiatory techniques, such as the rhythmic repetition of incantatory formulas and the mention of dhikr, which is one of the fundamental elements of the initiatory methods in Sufism. And he says that the final goal to be achieved is always the realization of the universal man, through the perfect communion of the totality of states, harmoniously and hierarchically aligned, in integral development in the two senses of breath and exaltation. Expressions that, in fact, we find in the At-Tuhfa al-Mursala ila al-Nabi of Burhanpuri. This passage is completed with the following note, which is not found in the final version, which appeared later in Aperçu sur l'initiation. This sentence contains an expression of the esoteric meaning of the sign of the cross, symbol of this double expansion of being, horizontally in the breadth or expansion of integral individuality, indefinite development of a particular possibility which is not limited to the corporeal part of individuality, and vertically in the indefinite hierarchy of multiple states corresponding to the indefinity of the particular possibility included in the universal man. Universal man was to be the central theme of a series of articles that appear from February to June again in La MIAS of the same year, entitled The Symbolisme de la Croix, the first draft of the book that would appear in its definitive form in 1931. The main metaphysical axis of the doctrine of universal man is once again the notion of Wahdatul Wujud, and the themes sketched at the end of the article prayers and enchantment are here expanded in all their universality to explain the metaphysical foundation of spiritual realization in relation to the doctrine of multiplicity of state of being, which, as can be seen in the definitive book that appeared in 1931, is also the title of the first chapter. The doctrine of universal man and the corresponding symbolism of the cross are brought back to the primordial origin, and consequently, their presence in all the sacred civilization of mankind at all times and in all latitude is emphasized. Guénon says, in fact, most of the traditional doctrine symbolize the realization of universal man with a sign which is the same everywhere. And this because it is, as we said at the beginning, one of those that are directly linked to the primordial tradition. It is the sign of the cross. Nevertheless, it is indicative that in a famous note of a chapter 3rd, Guénon reported the following expression formulated some 20 years ago by a person who then occupied a very high position in Islam, even from some exoteric point of view. Of course, it is mentioned here is a reference made to Shaykh al-Kabir. He said, if the Christians have the sign of the cross, the Muslim have the doctrine. Guénon had just been supported by textual quotation of a message from the Tufa, as we have seen. And in the Tufa is written like this: when man in the universal grade exalt himself toward the sublime, when the other grace or non-human state arise in him in their perfect development, he is the universal man. Through exaltation, uruj, as well as amplitude in Bisat, have reached their fullness in the Prophet, with therefore identical to the universal man. The two concepts of amplitude and exaltation constitute the starting point and the main reference for the axial symbolism of the cross in Guénon work, both on the metaphysical and initiatory level. Michel Valsin, in a paper on the Islamic references of the symbolism of the cross, while translating the chapter 20 of the Futuhat al-Makkiyah on the science proper to Jesus, showed how Ibn Arabi rather used tul and al, respectively length and width, belonging to the vocabulary of al-Hallaj, who was being executed in Baghdad in 922, the beginning of the 4th century, Hijrah century. And show the specifically Christic character of this doctrine within Islamic esotericism. Okay. The universality of this conception means that the symbolism of the cross is far from being specific of Christianity, even if in some way it is inextricably linked to it. This doctrine is based on the universality of the state of being, on which the conception of the universal man has its fundament. The individual man, whom Ibn Arabi calls al-Insan al-Hayawani, the animal being, possesses only a relative and fragmentary unity. Therefore, only the realization of the universal reality can lead to the effective spiritual realization. In order to give the idea of totality, the sphere that we represented here must be indefinite. At the axes that form the cross are indefinite, which are 3 diameters at right angles of this sphere. In other words, the sphere, which is constituted by the irradiation of its center, is never closed, since this irradiation is indefinite and fills the entire space with a series of concentric waves. The representation here is limiting, of course, it's representing the cosmos in his manifestation, but actually what we can see is just the visible cosmos. Behind it, there is a subtle cosmos, the world of the subtle, the igneous being, and behind it, the angelic world. All this, it is within this frame of the luminous sphere. And behind it, the black area here is representing the non-manifestation. And only with this, the representation arrived to its fullness. This is why we represented the vertical line going up, reaching the top and the bottom without a specific delimitation. This luminous spherical form, indefinite and not closed, its alternation of concentration and expansion, which are became successive from the point of view of manifestation, but in reality simultaneous in the eternal present, as Michele Petrone showed us yesterday in the concept of the eternal instant and moment, is in Islamic esotericism the form of Ar-Ruh al-Muhammadiyya, which is nothing but the form of the universal man. Sorry, there is a mistake. This conception is based on the notion of infinite, which for Guénon is always a universal wall or absolute reality. This infinite never becomes qualified as it is in the mathematical infinity. There is only one infinite. It is the ultimate principle without any limit whatsoever. When Guénon speaks of any quality that can develop to an unlimited extent, such as space, time, or number, he defines it as indefinite. Being, with capital letter, is a principle of manifestation, namely of universal existence. This metaphysical meaning is to be compared in theology to the notion of God as supreme being. The relationship between being, the principle, and existence, its manifestation, being comparable to that of God and creation. But being and universal existence does not represent ultimate reality. Besides a multitude of states of existence, of which our world is only one example, there are states beyond the conditions of existence, outside the being. Therefore are all the possibilities of non-manifestation, as well as the possibility of manifestation insofar as they are in a state non-manifested. So all that is thus outside and beyond being, we call it non-being. This is in the words of Guénon himself. But for us, this negative term is in no way a synonymous for nothingness. non-being is a domain per excellence of metaphysics and essential principles. However, when we oppose non-being to being, neither the one nor the other is infinite. Infinity belongs only to the totality of being and non-being, because this totality is identical with universal possibility. So we have here on the right synthesis, a graphic synthesis of what we have been showing before, as a representation of the cosmic cross, showing the cosmic spheroid and the axis of the world. As Guénon explained in his, especially in the symbolism of the cross, this indefinite sphere has one consequence, that every state of being, here represented with a central circumference that we can see, and where it is written Earth, but it doesn't represent only our Earth, the physical Earth, it represents the state of being, which is, in our case, is a human state of being. Okay, this horizontal circumference, which is cutting the sphere in two halves, can be situated in any place of the vertical line, and it will, since it is indefinite in the both directions, any place where we place it, it will be in the center, potentially in the center. The only fact that in order to become really the center, is that the man should realize its real center within himself. By this way, he is putting the place in where he lives and where his state of being is as a central state of the total dimension of which is represented by the Insan al-Kamil, the universal man, when also the vertical axis has been realized. So what is really our center here? He's talking about the difference between self and individuality. The self, in relation to any being whatsoever, it is essentially beyond all distinction and all particularization. The self, say Guénon, is not therefore really distinct from what the Hindu tradition called Atma, which in the Islamic tradition is identical to the divine ipsity, that is, the Huwa, which in cosmic existence appear as the spirit. When one considers it in relation to a certain definite state of being, such as a human state, the self appears as the spirit of such being, in its reflection in human individuality. This reflection is the center of this individuality. But if isolated from its principle, that is, from the self, it can only enjoy a purely illusory existence, for it is from that principle that it derives all its reality, and it effectually possesses this reality only through participation in the nature of the self, that is, insofar as it is identical therewith by universalization. And this is why we are calling man, and Guénon use the expression for translating Insan al-Kamil as universal man. Man, of course, is not a question of gender. It's just the human being, whatever it is. But universal here entering in a specific description that Guénon present in the book Man and His Becoming According to the Vedanta. In the second chapter, he explains the difference between universal and individual. Actually, before going to that, there is a first distinction, because we can see here the individual is made by two categories, general and particular, sorry. While the particular can be either collective or singular. The universal is whatever is beyond the individual. So the individual is represented by the formal manifestation, which can be either the subtle state or his corporeal state, the gross state. While the universal is either the formless manifestation or the unmanifested. We have already explained before, the corporeal state is what the Islamic word called, the Islamic Sufism called al-mulk. The subtle state is what is called al-malakut generally. And the formless manifestation is al-alam al-arwah, the word of the spirit, which is jabarut. The manifested is al-ghaib, whatever is beyond the manifestation. And Guénon writes, the universal will not only consist of the unmanifested, but will also extend to the formless, comprising both the unmanifested and the supra-individual state of manifestation. As for the individual, it includes all degrees of formal manifestation, that is, all state in which beings are invested with form. For what properly characterize individuality and essentially constitute it as such is properly the presence of form, among the limitative conditions which define and determine a given state of existence. From the human point of view, the horizontal lines of the three-dimensional cross symbolizes the human state or any state of a being other than man. The center, his heart, where he can enter in contact with the transcendent. The upper part of the vertical axis, the state superior to the human being, the upper world and heavenly spheres. The inferior part, the states inferior to the human being, the underworld. The center here represents also what is referred to as the Edenic state, or in Sufism, the divine station, al-Makam al-Ilahi, where the great peace, Sakina, is obtained. The cross represents in very evident way how this realization can be achieved through the perfect communion of all state of being, according to the two senses of amplitude and exaltation. In fact, this double development of being can be considered as taking place on the one hand horizontally at a certain level of defined degree of existence, and on the other hand vertically, that is, in the hierarchical superposition of all degrees. The horizontal sense represents the integral extension of individuality assumed as the basis of realization, an extension that consists in the indefinite development of a set of possibilities being to a certain particular condition of manifestation. Subject to a certain particular conditions of manifestation. And in the case of the human being, this extension includes, as we have seen, both the bodily and the psychic domains. The vertical sense represents the hierarchy, which is also indefinite, of the multiple states, each of which, also understood in its entirety, is one of these sets of possibility, referring to as many worlds or degree, which are included in the total synthesis of the universal man. In this crucial representation, the horizontal expansion, therefore, corresponds to the indefiniteness of possible modes of the same state of being taken as a whole, and the vertical superposition corresponds to the indefinite series of state of the total being. This has been realized because we have said that the Prophet Muhammad is a perfect representation of Insan al-Kamil, and we have a representation of these two aspects of the symbol of the cross exactly in his realization of the total state of being during the Miraj. The spiritual path corresponds initially to the journey on the horizontal axis towards the center, and by integration of the whole of the human state. This integration corresponds to the breadth in the development of the universal man, and is linked to the integral extension of individuality. This stage is symbolized by the nocturnal journey, Isra, of the Prophet Muhammad from Mecca to Jerusalem in Islam. The second stage corresponds to the ascent on the vertical axis of the cross and to the exaltation in the development of the universal man, which is linked to the acquisition of the higher state of being. This second stage is symbolized by the Prophet ascent to heaven from Jerusalem to heaven. Yes, the Miraj. In the top chapter of the Universal Man, the second of the symbolism of the cross, Guénon underlines an essential point, a remark that he considered of primary importance. And it is that Universal Man exists only virtually, like an ideal archetype, until the actual realization of the total being has given him a present and positive existence. And this is true of every being, whoever he may be, considered insofar as he is carrying out or must carry out this realization. In order to avoid any misunderstanding, he also say that such an expression, which represents as successive what is essentially simultaneous in itself, is only valid from the specific point of view of a state of manifestation of being, when this state is taken as a starting point of realization. These two states of universal man, which we can call negative prior to realization and positive when this realization has been achieved, corresponds, says Guénon in the language of Christian tradition, to the state prior to the fall and to the state following the redemption, respectively. And they also correspond to the two Adams mentioned by St. Paul in the first epistle to the Corinthians. The universal man is essentially a mediator in existence. The true mediators, in which the union of heaven and earth is fully realized by virtue of the synthesis of all state in the universal man, who is identical to the verb. The concept of mediator, which could be translated with the Arabic word barzakh, is treated by Guénon in several parts, but specifically in the book La Grande Triade, the Great Triad, which is devoted apparently, consistently to the Cynic tradition, and especially Taoism, but actually behind it we can read a description of the notion of Khilafah as is represented in the Islamic esotericism. The central theme of the book, in fact, is the doctrine of the Wâhid, or king, already identified by Guénon in the symbolism of the cross, for instance, with the universal man. He said and it is particularly suitable for representing this function, the character, the ideogram, Chinese ideogram, which designate the Wâhid, the king, in fact, which is made by 3 strokes, and Guénon described this in this way. Wâhid is the king, but also something else. To see why and how this is the case, we have only to look at the character Wâhid itself. It is made up of 3 horizontal strokes that correspond to heaven, man, and earth. Uniting the 3 strokes at their center is a vertical. In fact, as the etymologists explain, the function of the king is to unite. And with this, given the position of the vertical line, we must first intend to unite heaven and earth. From this, we see that the character is a symbol of man, man as a median term of the great triad, and specifically man in his role as mediator. To be even more precise, the character is a symbol of universal man. The vertical stroke stands for the axis effectively uniting every state of existence. When sometime Guénon, when he's talking about the symbolism of heaven and earth in other tradition, he refers to Purusha and Prakriti, which are representing the universal essence, the universal substance, the two poles of the cosmic sphere of existence. And he says the Purusha Prakriti code can be therefore identified with the universal man, but only with reference to the manifestation, as we said earlier, and it is evidently always from this point of view that the latter is the universal man is a mediator between heaven and earth, since when one passes beyond the manifestation, these two terms disappear. An application of the cosmic and non-individual nature of the universal man is expressed by Guénon when he comes to treat the principle from which the formulation of every sacred law in our world proceed. A principle that in Hindu tradition is designated by the name Manu, which, considered from another point of view, is also the progenitor of the human race. He said that the law may be regarded as a universal will, by an analogical transposition which, however, does not allow anything personal to subsist in the conception, nor even more so anything anthropomorphic. The expression of this will in every state of manifested existence is called Prajapati, or the Lord of produced being. Translated in Arabic, it would be Rabbi Allah Rabbi Alameen. And in each particular cosmic cycle, this same will manifests itself as a Manu who gives this cycle its proper law. Manu should not therefore be taken for the name of a mythical, legendary, or historical personage. It is, properly speaking, the name of a principle, which can be defined, according to the meaning of the verbal root man, as cosmic intelligence, or thought reflecting the universal order. On the other hand, this principle is seen as a prototype of man, who is called Manava, and he is essentially considered a thinking being, characterized by the possession of manas, a mental or rational element. The conception of Manu is therefore equivalent, at least in some respect, to what other tradition, in particular the Jewish Kabbalah and Muslim esotericism, designate as a universal man, which Taoism called the king, al-Wâhid, as we have seen. We saw earlier that the name Vyasa, the one who ordered the Vedas for the Hindu tradition, the corpus of the revelation, designate not a man, but a function. In that case, however, the function is in a general way also an historical one, while Manu represents a cosmic function, which can only become historical when specially applied to the social order, but without this in itself implying any kind of personification. Manu, therefore, as Guénon will say in The King of the World, is at the same time the cosmic intelligence that reflects the pure spiritual light and formulates the law, proper to the condition of our world or our cycle of existence, but also at the same time the archetype of man, considered especially as a thinking being. In Sufism, we find instead a functional distinction between two complementary principles. For Ibn Arabi, the archetype of man is Adam, the father of the human species, who is defined as the father of bodies, Abul Ajsam, while Muhammad, considered in his spiritual reality as supreme spirit and universal intellect, is a father of the spirits, Abul Arwah. Muhammad, the last prophet to appear in bodily existence, is in fact the first to exist in terms of spiritual essence, according to his own saying, I was prophet when Adam was still between water and clay. I have to synthesize a little bit. There is also, of course, a reflection of this cosmic function in our state, because the one who realized the degree of Insan al-Kamil, and which has became a universal reality himself, and made of this state of being, the human state from which he started his realization, he made this state the central state of the cosmic sphere. So where he placed himself is exactly as a center. The center, we say it is a divine station. It is also the primordial condition of man, his Hedonic condition, where he was in the terrestrial paradise. And he appears from this point of view as the ruler, or the function of the ruler, as the center of our state of being. There are different perspectives here that we can apply, but especially when we are talking about the pole of the spiritual hierarchy in the Islamic Sufism, this pole is occupying the central place, and he is a mediator for the other being in this state of existence. So from the Chinese character 1, we see that man occupies a central position. This position is that of the primordial man, the one that man possessed at the origin of his manifestation in existence due to the potentiality of the khilafah, the vicegerents, that is conferred on him by its centrality in the cosmos, which is nothing but his possibility of becoming a universal man. It rises from it rises from earth to heaven and comes down again from heaven to earth, and so acquires the power of things above and the power of things below. This statement from the Hermetic Esmeralda table can be applied word for word to man as medium term of the Great Triad. That is, it can be applied to man in his role as mediator responsible for maintaining communication between heaven and earth. The center of the cross is therefore the point at which all opposition are reconciled and resolved. In this point is situated the synthesis of all the contrary terms, which in reality are contrary only if they are regarded according to the external and particular perspective of knowing and knowledge in a distinctive way. This central point corresponds to what in Islamic esotericism is referred to as the divine station, as we have already said. It is what the Far Eastern tradition, for its part, calls the invariable middle, the place, that is, of the perfect equilibrium, represented as the center of the cosmic wheel, a center which is also, at the same time, the point where the activity of heaven and its will, also we can say, is directly reflected. This center directs all things by its actionless activity, which although unmanifested, or rather, because it is unmanifested, is in reality the fullness of activity, since it is the activity of the principle from which all particular activities are derived. According to the Taoist doctrine, the perfect sage is he who has arrived at the central point and abides there in indissoluble union with the principle, sharing its immutability and imitating its actionless activity. So then he quotes a passage from Lao Tzu, who says, "He who has reached the maximum of emptiness shall be fixed steadfastly in repose." To return to one's root is to enter into the state of repose. The emptiness here in question is complete detachment from all manifested, transitory, and contingent things. So this is also an indication of how man can reach his real nature. I remember when Van Damme, at the beginning of his conference, was talking about the stripping off, not a judging something, stripping off of what are the superimposition to our real center and dear self, and in order to discover our identity with the eternal truth, which is veiled and covered by the individuality and all the other correlated conditions. So I repeat, the emptiness here in question is complete detachment from all manifested, transitory, and contingent things. By it, the being escaped from the vicissitudes of the stream of forms, from the alternation of the state of life and death, and of condensation and dissipation, and passes from the circumference to of the cosmic wheel to its center, itself described as the void, the unmanifest, which unite the spokes and makes them into a wheel. We can remember also the title of the which has been mentioned many times, of the commentary of Kayseri, and which is one of the important terms for understanding Quran at the beginning, and also for the realization of being, which means al-matla, the point of ascent. In terminology of Guénon, this could be compared to the passage, because Guénon was a mathematic also especially, and many times he described the doctrine in mathematical geometrical symbolism. And little attention perhaps has been devoted to his principles of the infinitesimal calculation. And he was talking there of the passage to the limit. The passage to the limit is just in all the books of the infinitesimal calculation, Guénon himself said, is the complementary book to the multiple state of being, and is a kind of application of how one can make an integration between the multiple state of being through this detachment, in order to fix himself in the void center of the non-manifested reality. So what this center is. Peace in emptiness, says Lietzu, is an undefinable state. It is neither taken nor given. This peace in emptiness is the great peace of Muslim esotericism, called in Arabic as-Sakina, a designation which identifies it with the Hebrew Shekinah. It is the divine presence as the center of the being, symbolically represented at the heart in all tradition. This divine presence is in fact implied in the union with a principle which cannot be effectively attained except at the very center of the being. To him that dwells in the unmanifest, all being manifests themselves. United with the principle, he is thereby in harmony with all beings. United with the principle, he knows all through the general reasons of a higher order, and consequently no longer uses his various senses to know in particular and in detail. The true reason of things is invisible, ungraspable, undefinable, undeterminable. Only the spirit reestablished in the state of perfect simplicity can attain its in profound contemplation. this last word between brackets is a quotation from Chuanzi. Place it at the center of the cosmic wheel, the perfect sage move it invisibly by his mere presence, without sharing in its movement and without having to concern himself with exercising any action whatsoever. The ideal is the indifference detachment of the transcendent man, which is an Taoist equivalent of the universal man, who lets the cosmic wheel turn. This absolute detachment rend him the master of all things, because having passed beyond all opposition inherent in multiplicity, he can no longer be attached by anything. He has attained perfect impassibility. Life and death are equally indifferent to him. The collapse of the manifested universe would cause him no emotion. He has reached the immutable truth, the unique universal principle. He lets all being evolve according to their destinies, and himself stand as the motionless center of all destinies. I try to go over because it will be too long. I will try to conclude. Okay. Muhammadan universality. The luminous spheric form, indefinite and non-closed, says God, which is with its alternation of concentration and expansion, is in the Islamic esotericism the form of Ruh al-Muhammadiyah. We have already quoted this. It is this total form of the universal man that God ordered to the angels to worship. The divine word, the verb, which is also another term that in Christianity especially is indicating the universal man, in Islam is the order, al-amr, from which creation takes place, that is the production of the universal manifestation, be it understood as a whole or in any of its modalities. Also, according to the Islamic tradition, the first creation is that of the light, an-nur, which is called min amrillah, that is proceeding immediately from the divine order or command. And this creation is situated, if we can say so, in the world, that is in the state of the degree of existence, which for this very reason is called alamul amr, and constitute the pure spiritual world. In fact, the intelligible light is the essence, that of the spirit, ruh, and the latter, when understood according to its universal meaning, is identified with the light itself. It is for this reason that the expression al-Nur al-Muhammadi or al-Ruh al-Muhammadiyah are equivalent, since both indicate the principle and total form of the universal man, which is awwalu khalqillah, the first in the divine creation. It is the true heart of the world, whose expansion produces the manifestation of all being, while its contraction finally leads them back to their principle. In this way, it is the first and the last, al-awwal wal-akhir, in relation to creation, just as Allah himself is the first and the last in the absolute sense. Here we are going to close. The same concept is taken by Guénon, in the top chapter of the Universal Spirit, Ar-Ruh, in his studies on Islamic esotericism and Taoism. As can be seen in other masters of Sufism, for example, Izzeddin Kashani, in the commentary on the Yahyâ of Ibn al-Farid, quoting Suhrawardi, also Guénon places him as the original of the theophanies and the very principle of prophecy. And this is to say that, I'm quoting now Guénon, al-Ruh is none other than al-Ruh al-Muhammadiyya, in whom all the prophets and all the divine envoys are one, and which is the word below, which is in the word below, has ultimate expression in him who is their seal, Khatm al-Anbiya wal-Mursalin, that is in the one summarize them in a final synthesis, which is the reflection of their principal unity in the supernal world, where he is Awwal Khalqillah, the last in the order manifested, being analogically the first in the principal order. And it is thus also the master of the first and the last ones, Sayyid al-Awwalin wal-Akhirin. Those and only those can all the names and titles of the Prophet be truly understood in their profound meaning, which are ultimately the same possessed by the universal man, al-Insan al-Kamil, which finally incorporates in itself all the degree of existence, just as he already contained them all in himself from the beginning. Guénon, he says, this is from him, alayhi salatu rabbil arshi dawman, may the Lord of the throne prayer be perpetually upon him. Okay, thank you, I finished.